Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, The Surprising Economics of Mainframe Technology. Before we begin today's presentation, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to address with you all. To enlarge your slide view, click on the Maximize button in the top right corner of your slides. To ask questions, please submit your questions via the Q&A widget and hit Submit. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Also notice the Learn More widget. Here, we've added a copy of today's slide presentation along with some additional content, including the Technology Economics of Mainframe Part 3, New Metrics and Insights for Mobile World, white paper written by Dr. Howard Rubin. We also encourage you all to fill out our short survey before the end of today's presentation, and by submitting your response, you will automatically be entered to win a $50 American Express gift card. And finally, if you have any technical difficulties during today's presentation, click on the help link located via the question mark widget at the bottom of your screen. Where you may find details about system requirements and frequently asked questions. We are extremely pleased to have as our speakers today Dr. Howard Rubin, founder and CEO of Rubin Worldwide, Ross Mauri, General Manager, IBM Systems, and Chris O'Malley, CEO of Compuware. With that, I'd now like to welcome and hand things over to Dr. Rubin.
Thank you, and I am very pleased to be part of the webinar today. And our title, The Surprising Economics of Mainframe Technology, well, when I'm done with it, I don't think you'll be surprised. And an important foundational concept to have is that we are really in a technology economy. That's how important this stuff is. Actually, if you go to Bloomberg today, and this is not an advertisement for Bloomberg, but if you just go there today, one of the big headlines is the Dow before and after Apple. You'll see all the stuff about cybersecurity. Strangely enough, Apple is in a few places today because I'll talk about how the Swiss watch shows right now are being shaken by technology, the release of the Apple Watch and Samsung and the other things. So the research I've been doing and with my colleague Jed Rubin and colleagues at Gartner at MIT has really been focused at investigating the technology economy. We're doing this for more than 30 years. And as I said, we're clearly in a technology economy, and by that we mean markets, business performance, aspects of our personal life are more dependent on technology than ever before. Therefore, the choices we make about technologies are more critical than ever. And the criticality of that isn't just measured by the cost of the technology. It's the outcome or output or result of using the technology. And we truly believe that choices of technologies that we use for business platforms can no longer be made as a fashion statement. There's evidence, there's a hard fact of 30 or more years of studying what I call technology economics, and the science has matured, that we can do things in ways that look at both technology itself and the business outcomes and things we're trying to do. And more interesting than that, and you'll start to see some of the data shortly, is when we plow into economics of basic platforms and looking at the impact of platforms on mainframes and servers and other things and what it does to business, you'll see the facts start to show that the scalability, the economic structure, and the basic performance security of the mainframe, and this is why I said it's a surprise and not a surprise, results in extreme business outcomes, positive impact, and we have the facts to support them. And the kinds of analytics I'll be talking about, and you'll be hearing from Ross and Chris as we go through the presentation today, the business decisions you're making in the firm should be made by facts, and facts on influence of the organization you're in, and showing those outcomes, and we're going to try to show some of that today. So why don't we go up to my first real panel other than my title, and we'll talk about what might be our introduction here. And if we start to take a look on this panel entitled Introduction and what's going on in the global economy, the most interesting thing is for years, in terms of technology, we've sort of been carried by Moore's Law. We know that if you go back 20, 30 years, the amount of technology in use is lower than it is today. And the cost structure of technology, Moore's Law is giving us doubling and lower cost as we go along. The issue we face today has to do with something quite different. And what we're facing today is that demand is outstripping supply. There's something called Jevons paradox, and it says the lower costs get, the faster consumption goes up, that you start consuming things faster than unit costs drop down. So we're in a global economy that has this massive thirst for computing. And a matter of fact, that the demand we have for computing is going faster than supply. The interesting thing is we look at the economy, we look at the banks, we look at most firms, revenue isn't growing at a fantastic rate, but the amount of technology they need is growing more and more. So if technology thirst is growing faster than revenue, it's growing faster than GDP, which you'll see in a while, it's growing faster in our personal life. We need to start making the right economic choices in choosing the technology. Number two, there's a new math of technology economics. Jed and I have been exploring this stuff in various ways since 1982. And we're starting to find out that organizations can get massive leverage from making the right choices. And you'll see as I discuss the material in my next 20 minutes or so, I'll talk about the words mainframe-heavy versus server-heavy. I'm using those terms to describe organizations that are doing the bulk of their computing on a mainframe or the bulk of their computing in a server environment. And what I've done in the research, and what Jed and I have done, is we've been working and looking at this stuff for, as I said, many, many years. And the stages we went through in looking at the research, so I said, how can we look at different organizations? How can we typify them? And how can we understand the essence of various platforms? So we take a look at 3,000 companies that we track. We take data we have going back almost decades, but more recently in looking at the period about 2000 to the current time, and we start to bifurcate the organization, saying what's the performance of organizations that are relying mainly on mainframe? What's the performance of organizations that are relying heavily on servers? And separate those groups and see the difference in performance. And we're starting to see, and you'll see some of the data now, that mainframe-heavy infrastructure has economic benefits on the cost side, but massive benefits on the outcome side in terms of business cost of goods and other characteristics. And the other thing that's interesting about a mainframe environment is if we're in a world where technology intensity is increasing wildly, we need upward scalability. That means cost doesn't go up linearly as demand goes. It goes up at a far lower rate. And as they even mentioned in looking at the world of Bloomberg today and the issue of cybersecurity, we need environments that are upward scalability. We need environments that have security. We need environments that have the cost structure we need. And even there's a potential for greenness that I'll mention. Part of my strange background is I have a doctorate in computer science and oceanography, and I look at a lot of environmental and ecological issues. And even in looking at the mainframe, not just from a cost perspective and security and scalability, but looking at it from consumption and what it does to the environment, you get some very interesting results. And let me start to take you on the journey through the numbers to see, so you can start to see what we've started to learn about this stuff. And a landmark point in time for this research, and the first time that Jed and I really started to look at the mainframe and different computing platforms versus server and their impact upon business, was around 2011. And why we got interested at that point in time is 2011 was a tipping point year for us. As we looked across these thousands of companies we tracked and we looked at infrastructure growth, by 2011 we found that infrastructure growth, the amount of servers, the amount of storage, mainframe MIPS, all the basic sort of computing commodities that organizations were using, the growth rate started to move into the double digits. And we started to learn that as the growth rate moved into double digits, organizations could no longer surf their future on Moore's Law. Moore's Law was not giving them the offset. They can get more capacity for less cost and everything would balance out. And that's when we started to embark on this kind of study that we're talking about now. And we started to learn some things in the pre-mobile generation. The first thing we learned is that we're able to see a real statistical difference in terms of cost, both on the technology side and scalability, but outcome side and what we call IT cost of goods for organizations. IT cost of goods could be the technology cost per patient in a hospital bed per day. IT cost of goods could be the IT cost to do a credit card swipe. It could be the cost per trade in financial services. It could be a claim in insurance. It could be the cost of having the SKU in a retail or a manufacturing operation. You can start to look at technology cost of goods and get a view of this. And what we started to find in our early research is that, yes, there was a split. We can actually separate and see patterns in the technology economics of mainframe versus servers. And in the slide on our early findings here, what we saw commodity server-heavy organizations had higher infrastructure costs than the mainframe organizations. Mainframe organizations had lower cost of goods, and we started to see, and this was in our second round of research, that in fact technology intensity had some scale factors itself in terms of that small and mid-tier organizations were far more sensitive to the amount of technology they needed to do business than the mega giants, the biggest banks, the biggest manufacturers. So in fact, making the right technology choices was critical for everybody, but it had a bigger differential effect on smaller and mid-tier organizations. They were far more sensitive to the technology costs and technology impact. Now, if we go up to the next panel, I've made the point that we're in a world of increasing technology intensity. These are some basic figures that I found intriguing. If we looked at the change in the world's GDP from 1980 to 2014, during that period, the world GDP grew by a factor of 3.38, as you'll see on the panel. The IT GDP, the amount of technology needed to support the GDP, grew by a factor of almost 16, I should say. That number, by the way, the amount of technology expense to support the current world GDP is about $5 trillion a year. If the folks on this call today, webinar, are all technologists, fundamentally what this says is something quite interesting. The economy that you're part of, which is not visible, well, the only ones bigger than it are the U.S. and China. And in fact, you're part of probably the third largest economy in the world. By the way, at the same time, the growth rate of that economy is running at 4.7%, which is faster than any developed nation. If we bring this down to a personal level, and we just go up to the next panel, in the world of increasing technology intensity, look at a personal level. Well, without spending a lot of time on this, just to give you a quick example, in 1980 there wasn't a lot of technology you can have as a person, but in fact it was about $132 a year was your technology expense in the way we're defining technology here. Fast forward to 2010, that number is 13x that. It's almost $4,000 a year. What that has fundamentally meant, and there are a lot of statistics on this panel, is that in the U.S., technology spending per individual went from about 0.5% of annual income in 1980 to almost 8% of annual income in 2010. That's, again, the measure of rising technology intensity. And the reason that's relevant is we're on the cusp, and if we go up to the next panel, we're at another inflection point. Because the work that Jen and I were doing, we were just tracking things in terms of the rise of the amount of technology. But now there's another force, there's another wind shear force, beyond cybersecurity issues, beyond risk issues, beyond compliance issues that's going to drive computing cycles up. It's the rise of the mobile user. In 2004, and again, this is like my earlier example on personal technology intensity, in 2004 there really wasn't much technology out there for people to use for mobile transactions, and the average person was doing about one mobile transaction per day. By 2014, this last year, the number has grown to about 37 transactions per day per mobile user. And by 2025, and this is smartphones, all this stuff, it's likely to grow by a factor of 5. This has massive implications because it's not just those transactions. It's what happens at the back end when a transaction is triggered. What does it do to your infrastructure? How many operations and IOs and everything are spawned by all this? So the back end is going to be under tremendous load. But if you look at these numbers, a 37x, another 5x, the economy and businesses aren't going to be growing at that rate. So we're going to be in a world where we have some rise in revenue, and hopefully the economy continues to grow at some reasonable rate. But the demands on the back end infrastructure are going to be massive, and companies cannot afford linear expansion of their infrastructure costs. They're going to need a solution that's going to give them upward scalability, and it's also going to give them the economics they need to maintain their margin and things like that. If we go up to the next panel, and this just supports some of the figures I've given you before, but I wanted you to see what was going on between 2014 and 2012. And these are just, like I said, basic commodities, and I took a look at the world of banking over here. If we took a look at the nation's biggest banks, and banks to me are like the canary in the coal mine of what's going on out there. In my point about technology growth versus revenue growth, the suite of big banks, we made a bank of banks. The revenue went down 1.5%. That's the J.P. Morgans, the Bank of Americas, Wells Fargo's, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all those. Create a bank of banks, and look what happened. Revenue went down. Tech spending went up 1.2%. But look at this wild growth. Storage terabytes by 14%. Server instances by 13%. Mainframe MIPS by 12.6%. The Infrastructure consumption is outpacing revenue growth, it's outpacing operating systems growth, and it's outpacing any possibility of savings derived from Moore's Law. And to give you some insight into exploring the dynamics of mainframe-heavy versus server-heavy, and if we go up to the next slide, I'm using the banks as an example here. We talk about platform economics, a tale of two banks. I can't name the banks right now, but you'll see some wildly different views of what's going on here. We have two banks, Bank A, Bank B, and if you take a look at the world of Bank A we called mainframe-heavy. In 2009, they were running 40,000 MIPS and 22,000 servers. By 2014, their MIPS had doubled to 120,000 and 22,000 servers. And Bank B was server-heavy. It was running on a platform of they were trying to be all servers all the time, but you see they managed their mainframe growth. They kept it flat about 30,000 MIPS, and their servers, they had about 45,000 to double to 90. So if you take a look at the business environment of those banks, both of them stayed fairly flat with regard to revenue, but both of them had different approaches to managing their computing platforms. And what did this mean in economics? Again, one doubled the MIPS to manage the business, the other doubled the server side, and it's sort of a yin and yang view. If we go up to the next panel, Bank A, who was mainframe heavy, they doubled the mainframe platform to support the increased business needs. They experienced a 30% increase in infrastructure costs. Bank B, the guys who were server heavy with a linear growth in servers, which doesn't scale like the mainframe, it resulted in 49% cost increase. So in fact, the server heavy environment, the overall cost of dealing with, and this wasn't business growth in terms of revenue. Revenue stayed flat. This came up with demand. The environment, they have increased their cost by 50% against 30% for the mainframe-heavy environment. So suddenly we see some signs of what's going on over there. And if we look at the numbers, and you'll see that at the bottom, the Bank A went from about $780 million a year to run that platform to a little over $1 billion. Bank B started at a higher base. Their core platform to run the same business was almost $900 million. It grew to $1.4 billion. So that differential is just massive. And in this particular case, the differential is almost $300 million to run the same business, and that goes to the bottom line. Now, if we take a look at the tale of two banks from a different view and sort of even move the banking a little bit out of it and go up to the next slide on platform economics, there's some difference in scalability and characteristics of costs of mainframe platform versus cost per OS instance. And you can start to see that on the current panel because installed MIPS, if you look at the curves, you'll start to see the difference in terms of that. The mainframe gives you increased scalability, and you start getting more economic leverage as you grow versus what goes on in the server environment. And that shows up in another way if we go up to the next panel and talk about some new metrics view. Now, an interesting way of looking at technology support to business is looking at a metric of income supported per dollar of infrastructure expense. So you take revenue minus expense and just divide it by your infrastructure expense. And if you look at Bank A, again, remember what these banks faced, flat revenue, increasing expense. The average bank in our database had a 29% reduction in that metric, income per infrastructure expense, in 2014. Revenue went down or stayed flat, expenses went up, and IT expense increased to deal with this. However, Bank A started at $13.84 of income per unit of dollar of infrastructure expense. With the growth and everything, that decayed down to 10.5. But look at the Bank B, started at 12.31, and by the end of this cycle of 2014, it was 8.22. So Bank A went through a change, and they ended up at 24% down. Bank B was 33% down. So in fact, the largest drop in technology support to the business of this group is evident in the server-heavy organizations. They're getting less leverage because the the non-scalable cost of the servers and the need to add capacity without getting the lift of the mainframe. And we can see this, and I've been talking about the banking industry. If we go up to the next slide, which is called platform economics, this is like a first table of the elements that Jed and I put together. And you can start to see, and you can actually do your own benchmark, income supported per dollar of infrastructure expense, and you could look at banking, chemicals. You can run down all those industries and see the difference and the spread. In all but 2 of the 19 sectors studied, mainframe-heavy organizations supported more income per dollar than server-heavy organizations. So you can sort of see start of an interesting case being built here. Stage 1, form a hypothesis we're in a technology-intense environment, both in our personal lives and business. Stage 2, hypothesize there's some differences between the impact of making different platform choices in terms of business performance and costs. And stage 3 is bring this down to business income supported for infrastructure. But stage 4 is the next panel. And we go to platform economics and get some renewed insight. Because if you go to your board of directors or your CEO or line of business head and you start talking about mainframe versus servers, they typically see servers that mainframe has a large, big cost pool. Servers, they think of individual low unit costs. But bring the stuff back to a cost of goods. You do a credit card swipe, you do a teller transaction, you look at moving a ton of freight on a railroad a mile, you look at a retail, you look at the per store, per door cost of technology, you look at the technology cost per barrel of oil. And on this particular panel, we've calibrated across the large database we have the average IT cost of goods on a unit measure that has meaning to the business IT cost of goods. We've looked at what it costs in a mainframe-heavy environment. We've looked at it in a server-heavy environment. And again, in this particular model, you'll see that the analysis of our IT cost of goods across 15 sectors shows that not only do we see favorability on the mainframe side where it's applicable, but we start to see the differential improving faster in the world of the mainframe-heavy organization. So the scalability theory looks like it is being proved. And this is the kind of analysis you need to do as an organization. When someone asks you to make a technology choice and you're trying to determine what you need for your future, clearly security needs all these other things come in, but you just can't look at the cost of the platform itself. You just can't say, well, this is what it cost me per MIP, or this is what it cost me per unit storage, or this is what it cost me per server. The key becomes of translating this to a business form, and the business form starts to say, here's what our business produces, whether it's servers, services, or widgets, products, however we're going to look at it. Here's what we deliver. Here's what we look at in our annual report. This is how we look at our cost of goods and service. This is how it's changing. And this is the contribution of technology to that cost, and this is the contribution of that technology to our margin. And that's what I'm saying. The choice of a technology platform is no longer a fashion statement that you want to be in vogue with a particular thing, whether it was cloud, whether it was servers. You could change the word for any generation. The ability to do the analytics on a fact base and bring it back to business product are clear and available. And as a matter of fact, and just come up to the next panel on the non-financial impacts, we can start to take a look at other impacts of using various platforms. One can be on platform efficiency itself and the amount of staffing and what we need to do to support the platform. And we're able to have an example here from banking on data center FTEs and as a percent of number of employees in commodity server-heavy environments versus mainframe-heavy. And you can see by the behavior, the same thing, mainframe-heavy is giving us leverage even in terms of staffing, which then translates in terms of dollars. And then number 2, the other thing that's over here on the bottom has to do with take an environmental, take a green view. Suppose you look at the economics of the mainframe, its power consumption, its footprint, and everything else versus having banks and banks of millions of servers and the power consumption that's driving data centers. Well, mainframe-heavy environment appears, and this is some new work we've been doing, has a smaller green footprint than what we see in the world of commodity servers. So I've taken you on a high-speed tour, and you have some papers that we've also distributed with regard to the webinar today. And that high-speed tour, again, we go from the stage where in a technology economy, technology influences markets and company performance in ways never anticipated. Technology intensity is growing. As an organization, we can start to calibrate that growth, but for your own strategic purposes, you need the platforms that are going to give you the scalability, reliability, and the raw economics you need. The economic determination is not made just on the input side, the cost of the platform. It's made on the outcome side, which has to do with cost of goods, has to do with impact on the business, has to do with impact on margin, pieces like that. And the work that we've done, this is 3 cycles of research, and although this sounds perhaps more like a blatant advertisement for mainframes, but it just shows how the mainframe environment has the characteristics that are needed for a world in which technology intensity is wildly increasing, and we're just at the cusp of the next inflection point with mobile. where we're going to face transaction volumes and things that have been unforeseen or unexperienced in the past. So finally, let me sum up my part, because now we're going to go to some more information from other speakers, where we're going to look at the new generation of IBM Z systems and what that's going to look like, and that's going to be Ross, and then we're going to talk hear a bit from Chris O'Malley. But the challenges that we see are, number one, with all the changes going on, the economic climate over the past decade has really emphasized agility. And agility is key, but now we're in an area of agility combined with leverage. And I don't know if it's the folklore of the mainframe or whatever you want to describe it as, but if you look at the media, there were things in the past, the mainframe is dead, whatever the story is. The mainframe is vital. It's probably the most economically efficient platform we have, and now we have the numbers to show it. And what organizations need to do themselves is they need to understand what their business looks like. They need to bring things back to a business point of view. And, in fact, they need to use the new math of input and outcome and translate platform choices to a business format so that they can understand what's going on, make decisions. And, again, as I said early on, this is not about a fashion statement. It's not having the buzzword technology that's out there. It's having a sound economic basis that impacts your organization's ability to grow revenue, support revenue, ability to avoid cost, reduce cost, ability to manage risk, and for non-for-profit organizations, its ability to serve your constituencies reliably and provide the performance you need. So with that big sort of landscape tour of the technology economics of the mainframe and lessons that Jen and I have learned through our analysis over the past years, let me turn this over to Ross and from IBM Z Systems to discuss a new generation of IBM Z Systems. And thank you, and I'll be here for questions.
Thank you very much, Howard. What a great fact-based case for the mainframe. I really appreciate that. And I just want to add a little context on how we view the IT landscape and also what perspective that was used in developing the new Z13. And in case you haven't heard, we did start shipping the new Z13 this month. General availability was on the 9th. And it's our latest mainframe, and it's a significant leap forward in addressing the demands of the digital economy. We've got a few of them already in production in clients, and we're getting really, really positive feedback, and I'm really excited about this new generation, and I hope that you will be too. I'd like to start really by linking back to reinforce something that Howard just told us. So if you would go to the next slide, please. Anyone recognize this picture? Think about it. Okay, let's go 8 years into the future. Can you go to the next slide, please? Same venue, same event. It's a papal inauguration. Notice anything different between the two pictures? Obviously, the mobile generation is everywhere, including with the papal inauguration. And people aren't just taking, selfies and photos with their phones. They're doing it with their tablets too. And really, what this underpins that's going on is a fundamental change in the way we all interact and transact, and that mobile is really changing the way we live and the way we work. Can you go to the next slide, please? And this interaction, both with our friends and our families, but also with how we work and how we interact with our clients or our suppliers, and how we also transact, how we research information on the web and how we buy and things like that. And what's really interesting to me is this mobile is not only changing our lives, but it really is going to put some significant stress on the systems that support those mobile devices. And as Howard said, we've seen a 37 times increase in mobile transactions per day per user over the last decade. And I don't know which side you are of that average. I can tell you I'm probably a little bit less than that average, but my daughter is more than that average. And so it really depends where you are, but that's an interesting average, and it's quite high. But if you're into IT architecture and IT technology, the starburst effect, which is what one touch of a screen on a mobile app can kick off in the back end, is today's transactions that are kicked off again by one tap of a mobile app screen can kick off 4 to 100 back-end transactions. And that starburst effect is what's really putting stress on systems today, but it's also something that we've known about, we've been watching it, and we built the new Z13 to ensure it could handle that. And I think the scary thing, though, for everyone, but we took this into account, was that over the next 4 years, the projections are that those back-end, that starburst effect could again multiply by a factor of 4. So one touch of a screen could be kicking off 400 back-end transactions. Next screen, please. So for those of us that know and love the mainframe, the mainframe strengths are really built on a history of rock-solid transaction processing and data serving, running mixed workloads, being very operationally efficient. And again, Howard demonstrated some of that throughout his talk. Clearly a trusted and secure computing platform with all the reliability and availability you need to run your business 24/7 by 365, and with virtually limitless scale. One of the things that I think people don't really recognize is just how much of the world runs on the mainframe today. And there was a recent study, it was from September of 2014 by Solitaire Interglobal, where they went out and they looked at running in production IT systems of over 314,326 different customers and projects. It was a global study. And what they found within that, so this is applications running in production today, not about what's coming in the future or what might happen. They looked at that and they did a very detailed cost analysis, and they took into account all costs: purchase, lease, software licenses, electricity, floor space, you name it, everything except labor. They couldn't, because they couldn't tie exact labor figures to each system, they left labor out. But with that, surprisingly, what they found is that the mainframe in this study was 68% of the production workload, while only representing 6.2% of the overall spend. So that's an incredible ratio there. And it's, again, one more study, backs up the enormous amount of data that Howard just gave you, and just puts in perspective that the mainframe is not only important around the world, but from an economic point of view, it's kind of like it should be everyone's first choice. It probably isn't today, but hopefully all of us can turn that around in the coming months and years. So if you go to my last chart, what do? We designed the new Z13 for the digital and mobile app economy. We invested more than $1 billion, more than 5,000 IBM developers worked on this. There's more than 500 new patented technologies in the system. The hardware is new from the ground up. The microprocessor, the cache subsystem, the memory subsystem, the I/O subsystem, the cooling, the power packaging, all of it's new. And it is a groundbreaking system because we built on all of those traditional strengths of the mainframe, but what we added in the design of the hardware and the software, and it's an integrated design up the stack, is that we focused it on 3 very important market shifts that are going on today. The first is around being the world's premier data and transaction engine that's enabled for the mobile generation and ready to handle that starburst explosion. The second is in transaction analytics for right-time insights at the point of impact. And the third is to be the world's most efficient and trusted cloud system. And I really think it's private clouds and hybrid clouds that will probably be most used by our clients worldwide, although there are over 80 customers today serving public SaaS implementations for their clients off the mainframe as well. But I think hybrid is really the way we're going, but in terms of trust, security, that's the thing we built this around. And from a mobile point of view, this new mainframe is capable of handling more than 30,000 transactions a second, or almost 3 billion transactions a day, and that's per system. So let me give you a perspective of what that means. In 2014, we looked at the top 4,500 retailers that made up Cyber Monday in the United States. We all know about Cyber Monday. And if you took all the transactions from all 4,500 of those retailers on the 2014 Cyber Monday, a single Z13 could run 100 Cyber Mondays every day, 365 days of the year. So multiply that by 100, right? 100 Cyber Mondays a day on one of these systems. Why did we do that? We did it because of the starburst effect and what's coming. Mobile has exploded already, and it's going to continue to grow on us. And so this system was designed to handle the speed, scale, encryption, etc., needed for that world. Now, one of the other things we did here, and this is really a break from the past, is this real right-time analytics or in-transaction analytics is really a change for us. And I can't go into detail here, but just think of it this way. In the past, you always ran your online systems on a mainframe, and then you usually ETL'd the data off and built business warehouses and did your data mining and your queries on a different system. What we've done in the hardware and software design is enabled you to now run real-time analytics right along with the transactions and get insights for the point of impact. Not insights because you got a report the next day or the next week, but right during the transaction. Think about doing on-the-fly fraud detection. Think about doing on-the-fly upsell and cross-sell to generate more revenue. These real-time analytics we think are a game changer for this new system. And finally, we talked a little bit about security and trust in the cloud. But we've done things like double the speed of our encryption cards that are in the system. We've also now put an encryption processor into the microprocessor. So you can encrypt your data and keep your transactions, especially your mobile transactions, encrypted end-to-end from the mobile device all the way back to the mainframe and back out. So one last thing here that was important for us was that we needed to recognize that we're living in an agile world and recognize also that a lot of our mainframe pricing, T's and C's in the past, were not flexible. And so we did two major software pricing announcements that went along with the Z13. One of them is around doing container pricing, and the other is around eliminating all of those constraints that you might have today and how you set up and configure your systems. They have to be in a sysplex, and they have to have data sharing, et cetera, et cetera. We've wiped all of those constraints away with what's called country multiplex pricing, and then also with our ZCAP, or co-located application pricing, container pricing, we allow you to bring new workloads onto the platform and only pay the software cost for the amount of MIPS or MSUs that you use. So flexible pricing to go along with world-class technology, completely designed from the ground up and aimed at handling the explosion of mobile transactions, doing something no other system can do, which is do real-time analytics along with the transactions, and of course in the highest levels of trust and security in your cloud environment. So thanks for listening to an update on the Z13. And hopefully if someone asks you what's new with the new mainframe, a good answer might be, let's see, we've redesigned it, we've rethought it from the beginning to the end to meet the demands of the digital economy. So hopefully you can answer that question now. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris O'Malley. Chris?
Ross, thank you very much. And just one perspective on what Ross just said. I mean, the mainframe, especially the Z13, is an incredible platform as it relates to the traditional processing that's done on the mainframe. But they've done an amazing job of adding additional compute resources to make it, not just a viable but crucial platform for analytics. And I've been traveling the last few weeks subsequent to the Z13 launch, talking to customers. And what's becoming intriguing to them and supports what Ross just said is that a lot of the use cases for analytics, generating insights for the business, have to be done in true real time. And as Ross just took you through, that all those drops in terms of the steps when you take it off platform make it almost impossible. And you're seeing enterprises think more like a trading firm and less like thinking in terms of monthly cycles or quarterly cycles in terms of bringing insights to the business. So what they've done in the mainframe opens a series of use cases that make the platform very interesting beyond just its former uses or its legacy uses into a broader set of use cases. I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to give some feedback that I received over the last few weeks from CIOs and business executives in my travels recently, and I brought up the fact that we were going to have this mainframe economics session, and just wanted to have a healthy dialogue around their perspectives on the mainframe. Obviously new age CIOs have tended not to come from the mainframe ranks, so they're a little bit distant, if you will, around their understanding of the mainframe. So a couple things first is that, somewhat surprisingly to me, most of the CIOs and business executives actually knew that the mainframe transaction cost was less than other alternative platforms. They, either from empirical evidence that they've seen through previous studies from Howard, or data in their own, or just their instincts, they feel comfortable in knowing that the mainframe does do what it does very well and more efficiently than any other choice. Less surprisingly to me is that they knew clearly that the security of the mainframe, the reliability of the mainframe, the serviceability of it was all much stronger than other alternatives, and that the mainframe was indispensable to them. That they've got thousands of programs, they've got millions and millions of lines of code, it's the DNA of their corporation, it makes them what they are, it makes them in many ways have a competitive advantage. So it's got to be part of the strategic IT agenda going forward. But, and I emphasize but because in these conversations there's always something that gets in the way, I guess, of a good conversation. They wanted me to understand that we've got to elevate the conversation because it's not just about the mainframe. And they wanted me to understand that IT is changing in a radical way, in a very rapid way. That they're going from an organization kind of centered, and one used this term, servicing IT services, effectively, making sure that point of sale is going well, claims processes is going well. They're moving from that as kind of the major of the majors, if you will, in terms of IT, to becoming inventors. They're getting increasingly called into discussions around how do we service customers, customer experience, and figuring out innovative ways, effectively creating new products to basically work with their customers in the digital economy. As I said a few minutes ago, that they're being asked to create real-time insights, not just fast access to old data, but real-time insights to help them to make better decisions every day, every week, every quarter, every year. So these aggressive dispositions are changing the roles of IT, the expectations around IT, the processes around IT. And just as Howard and Ross are saying, this is not hype. And one of the CIOs actually used the example between Blockbuster and Netflix. Blockbuster as a company was the market leader in renting videos for many, many years. And they leaned on the fact that human behavior would not change, that we were creatures of habit in terms of renting videos on Friday night, that it was an impulse decision in terms of what we made, and that anything to change that would have so much inertia against it, it wouldn't put them at risk. Netflix had a completely different disposition. They believed that if they could make the customer experience infinitely better, and using technology towards that end, then in fact they could change their behaviors. And Blockbuster, in time measured in months, quarters maybe, went from being the dominant player to being passed by Netflix, and now the company no longer exists. And I think those factors are playing out because many of the companies I talk to do feel a sense of fear, uncertainty certainly, with Google, with Apple, with these upstarts in terms of them penetrating into their markets. So they're trying to give me a sense that IT has got to be more agile. And they actually use terminology that makes them sound almost like an internet startup. That they've got to be able to have development cycles that are measured in quarters, even less time, months. They've got to be very, very nimble in terms of responding to these needs because they're inventing things. They need to get customer feedback. They're going to have competitive forces in the market, but they have got to be able to, bob and weave, if you will, through this equation like a startup would. So when they kind of give me that context, they offer me a challenge, and actually one CIO in particular stated almost exactly this. He said, help me to end this debate on this platform religious, almost debate around which is better. Like it's a binary decision. It's not. These platforms do what they do in ways that make them gain advantages for us, like the mainframe. So let's settle the fact that this is not a debate between the platforms. It's got to be centered on the fact that we've got to use technology to compete in this new world market. So get this out of the equation, and we've definitely, through what we've done here with Howard and Ross and myself, are trying effectively to end that debate and be clear with empirical evidence in terms of the differences between the mainframe platform and the open systems. But he also said, I need some more help. It doesn't end there. that the mainframe itself has got to become more agile. It's got to become more nimble. We've got to make it maintain its extraordinary virtues as it relates to things like security and reliability, scalability, but in some ways we've got to make it more ordinary. We've got to make it, in terms of doing application development, things like application testing, working with data, more like what 25-year-olds are accustomed to on the open system side, because we do need to become a more agile IT organization in supporting our customers' needs. So, Russ just went through what he's done on the Z13, and I give a ton of credit to the IBM hardware team. That is an incredible and marvel of engineering that they've created that broadens its use cases and show a dedication from IBM to making the mainframe not only thrive as it has for the last 50 years, but escalate in terms of its innovation. Compuware is doing the same. We've come out with a new branded set of offerings called Topaz, which we sold our 8th customer, having had that product introduced to the market less than 2 months ago. And just as a note of the fact that we're doing what we're preaching, we conceived that product, designed it, got customer feedback, built it, and delivered it in less than 90 days. And it's having a significant success in the market because it really answers this question of bringing agility, elegant simplicity to the mainframe platform to allow people to leverage that asset that's, again, thousands of programs, millions of lines of code, to participate in these efforts to get more competitive in the digital economy. So thank you, and I'll open it up now for Q&A.
Thanks, Chris. Let me just take a look at the window and see what we had come in during the presentations. Looks like this one's directed for Dr. Rubin. Dr. Rubin, is it clear that at the board level, companies are facing more and more tough questions about their technology choices? How does this kind of economic analysis impact board conversations?
Well, thank you, and I enjoyed listening to all the other speakers too. I appreciate the questions coming in, and it's quite interesting. There's some of the research I'm doing with MIT. If you look at the compositions of boards today, more and more of them have technology committees or strong technology representation on those boards. So board conversation is changing, number one, because boards realize they need to get the basics down for technology. And at number two, within the board conversations now, things are changing, and the shift is going from what I saw, the cost of technology, where boards just want to beat on cost and, I'd say, increase margin through cost reduction, to understanding the leverage. So what I'm finding in the board conversations now is very clear discussions on technology economics of a particular firm, the input and the outcome side. Number two is looking at technology in the context of results in terms of operational efficiency, cost of goods, cost per transaction, and margin. And really the third part is the boards are reconstituting themselves with more and more technology expertise and guidance. And it's not just the cost side, clearly it's the full spectrum where we're dealing with security, risk, and all the issues there. So the board conversations are changing, and we'll start to see boards evolving, and my colleague Peter Weil at MIT sees this too, where boards themselves are becoming technology savvy, and they're asking questions on the overall value proposition and the kinds of questions that we're dealing with platform choices here and what basis they're being made. We're seeing those in the conversations too. So boards are becoming more capable of providing technology interpretation and guidance, but the IT technology people, the CIOs, need to start to change their role. The CIO, as I see it, is now becoming the chief technology economist of the company and needs to set technology monetary policy. And part of technology monetary policy is making these platform choices based on sound data. So I hope that helps a bit. Great,
thank you. Amy asks, what types of servers did this study consider? Commodity server?
Yeah, when we use the word commodity server, but we were there, and you start to see some of the charts on Windows OS, Windows operating system instances. So the study really looked at a mix of servers, and the mix of servers that we see evident in the companies we sampled have to do with Windows, Unix, and Linux servers. And we just used the commodity servers that we're looking at the broad band of classes of servers there. That's the best way. So it's across three environments and looking at the balance between making those choices.
Alex, asks, any thoughts on how those cost comparisons are causation differences and not just correlation? Will that come later?
I feel, well, answer to the current research, as we've been doing this for a number of years, and I just replied, on the Q&A box here on the presentation environment. But the interesting thing is we got all the data, and exactly the question is this correlation or causation? Right now we're in the causation stage. We have companies, we have banks that are engineering the cost of transaction and investing in mainframe futures to be able to build forward. So we're actually able to track this forward. So by that I mean working backwards from the business, we've taken a look at what business margins need to be, business transaction volumes, what they need to be, and making a decision that this is the platform we're going to use. We're going forward with the mainframe, and we're tracking forward now is the business performance matching the engineered expectations for scalability and everything, and IT cost of goods and margin. And doing that with banking financial services firms and with insurance firms. Actually, we're doing this with pure technology firms right now that do back-end processing and stuff, even for airlines. So we're at the stage now. Correlations are interesting. The causation is going to be important, and now we're getting the data on that.
Great. Can you please give the reference of the study that stated mainframes account for 68% of production workloads, but only 6% of IT spend?
Hi, this is Ross. What are they asking for on this report?
They're asking for the reference.
The reference of the study that stated mainframes account for 68% of production workloads.
Yes. It's from Solitaire Interglobal. What I can do is I can get a link back to our hosts here at Compuware that they can get out to everyone, so you can get an actual link to that report. I'm happy to follow up on that.
Next question: how does AIX figure into your picture and your stats?
I think that's for Howard.
Say that again. I missed it.
How does AIX figure into your picture and your stats?
Yeah, in our mix of servers, I should have said before. So we do have AIX, Unix, Linux, and Windows. So the environments we sample, especially when you get to the big companies, they all have AIX stuff in there. So it does figure into it in the details. You'll find it. I mean, if you look, we have the detailed data on that. Our contact information is there, and we've looked at it carefully. And again, when we talk about mainframe versus server heavy, we're looking where the balance of processing is in the server environment. Someone asked about the commodity servers. We put AIX into our commodity world.
Next question: how, if in any way, would the costs associated with the distributed platform be impacted by the debate between Windows and Linux? Were the distributed costs based upon Windows or Linux, or a combination of these two different operating systems?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, tell me to repeat. I'm getting some noise on the line. So I heard the beginning and not the end, not the middle. So just one more time, repeat it.
How, if in any way, would the costs associated with the distributed platform be impacted by the debate between Windows and Linux? Were the distributed costs based upon Windows or Linux, or a combination of these two different operating systems?
Okay, that's what I thought it was. It's the blend. So you take a look at any of the big banks I even talked about. You'll see they may have 30,000 Windows servers, 40,000 Linux servers. So this is all on a blend basis. So the differential is there, but we looked at the distribution of computing power and where it was mainly hitting. And again, that's servers versus mainframe. So we can do the economics between the different platforms. We have pure play on different platforms. We have all this underneath it to be able to do it. So all that, the answer is all that was considered, but most companies have a blend.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one or two more. Next question: when will the business class version of the Z13 be available?
This is Ross. So that's not announced, but if you look at history would have us follow our enterprise class system with a business class system about a year later. And I'd say look for history to repeat itself again.
Thank you. Time for one last question, and I think this one's directed at Chris. What steps are being made to train the labor force on mainframe? Are college students learning? Baby boomers are retiring.
So there's two parts to that question. One is that there are colleges that are aggressively pursuing curriculum around the mainframe. Actually, IBM, Share, and a bunch of the different kind of shared functions across the ecosystem are participating and making sure that sysprog, skills, COBOL skills are available, and the usual suspects are Northern Illinois University, West Texas A&M. I mean, there's a litany of Marist College. We'll definitely publish that, I guess, on the website. But there's more to it than just that. I mean, somebody once told me that showing a green screen to a 25-year-old is like showing garlic to a vampire. That the technology itself has to be adapted to be less extraordinary and more common to what are the tools that you would use on the distributed side. So, Topaz is definitely, a technology that's trying to create a look and feel that is consistent with what they would learn in just learning how to do application development on the open system side. We interestingly were just at the University of Michigan Dearborn a few days ago. We demonstrated Topaz, and having people in the audience who've never seen the mainframe, they could see how to actually do mainframe work vis-a-vis the Topaz tool set. So it really is both things. I mean, I think we've got to be dedicated that on the system side, the basic elements of the mainframe, that education is going into the system, and there are colleges that are generating a significant supply of skills within that space. But the product's got to get better. We've got to have innovative, more agile, more simplistic tool sets, and definitely we as a company are dedicated to doing that in the app dev, app testing, app performance space.
Great. That wraps up the Q&A. For those questions that we didn't have time to get to, please be reassured that we will be following up after the live broadcast. Again, as we previously mentioned, we encourage you all to fill out the short survey at the end of the broadcast and be entered to win a $50 American Express gift card. And with that, we'd like to thank you for attending today's webcast, and this concludes today's presentation. Have a great day.